Hello and welcome to another episode of the Military History Club's Great Battle in 10 Minutes feature. Today I'm discussing Operation Freshman, the daring attempt by British airborne forces to knock out the hydroelectric power plant at Vermork in Norway that the Germans were using to produce heavy water, a vital component for nuclear research, in November 1942. 2 years earlier, when Germany invaded Norway, the plant's existing stocks of heavy water had been sent for safekeeping to France and later the United States. But production had soon started again under German control, and in 1942 the Allies received word that the Nazi nuclear weapons program was getting close to developing a nuclear reactor. As this would require a great deal of heavy water to function, the destruction of the plant and its stockpile of heavy water became an urgent priority. Various options were considered: aerial bombing, which was ruled out because of civilian casualties, and an attack by Norwegian saboteurs, again rejected on the grounds that it would be too difficult to provide the necessary technical training and transport the quantity of explosives needed. This left an airborne operation, codenamed Freshman, which became the preferred option. With intelligence suggesting that as few as 40 Austrian troops were in the area, while only 6 were guarding the plant itself, it was decided that a force of 2 officers, 28 airborne sappers, and 4 pilots from the Glider Pilot Regiment would be enough to do the job. They would travel in 2 Horsa gliders towed by Halifax bombers from Skitton Airfield near Wick in northern Scotland. The flight would take from 3 to 3.5 hours, with the gliders due to land by moonlight on a 700-yard stretch of level ground on the edge of the Mosfarten Lake, 10 miles to the southwest of the plant. There they would be met by the 4 Norwegian SOE agents who had earlier marked out the landing zone with flares. If anything happened to one of the gliders, the 17 occupants of the other glider would be enough to do the job. Once the operation was over, the men were expected to head east on foot in pairs towards the Swedish border, a distance of at least 150 miles over difficult terrain. For the mission, they would be armed with Sten guns and carry the explosives, 10 days, iron rations and extra equipment in Bergen rucksacks. They would wear steel helmets, army boots and ordinary battle dress over civilian clothes that included white anorak jackets, woolen sweaters and blue ski trousers and army boots. They were to remain in their uniforms for at least the first 5 miles of their escape route and then discard them, their arms and accoutrements, when the opportunity allowed. Commanding the raiding force was 24-year-old Lieutenant Alexander Allen, the eldest of 4 siblings and a keen sportsman who had attended King Edward VI Grammar School in Birmingham. Among his men was driver Ernest Pendlebury, 25, from Heckmondwike in Yorkshire. The youngest member of the force was 18-year-old sapper Gerald Williams from Doncaster, South Yorkshire. On the 17th of November, thanks to an injury, the slightly reduced group of 2 officers and 27 airborne sappers moved to the departure airfield at Skitton, a satellite of Wick in the far north of Scotland. Their earliest departure was scheduled for the night of the 19th and 20th of November, when the moon in Norway would be close to full. While Allen and his men prepared for the mission, the RAF was mulling over the best method to get them there. Of all the countries, noted the historian of the Glider Pilot Regiment, Norway has the least suitable terrain for glider operations. The 500-mile tow, to be made during the hours of darkness, was longer than any so far attempted, even in daylight. The weather prevailing in that part of the world at the beginning of winter was unpredictable and mostly unfavourable, and it was essential that the glider landings be made during clear conditions. There was also the issue of using the Rebecca Eureka navigational aids to guide the Halifax tugs used to tow the gliders to the correct landing zone. The plan was for the SOE agents to set up the Eureka radio beacon device on the ground. It would then emit a signal which, with luck, would be picked up by the Rebecca device that had recently been fitted to the aircraft, thus providing it with vital navigational information. The 4 men chosen to pilot the gliders were Staff Sergeant MFD Strathdy and Peter Doig of the GPR, and Pilot Officer Davis and Sergeant Fraser of the Royal Australian Air Force, the latter pair bomber pilots who had been converted onto gliders. While all were excellent pilots, their glider training to date had necessarily been all too brief, certainly not sufficient preparation for the impending operation. Yet they were all as keen as mustard. On the 19th of November, the first weather report from Norway was unfavourable, with a strong westerly airstream over Scotland and the North Sea. But later in the morning it was considered that conditions might be possible. Partial cloud layer was expected for most of the flight, but as long as the target area was reached after 8 p.m, it would be cloudless with good visibility and sufficient winds to keep the valleys clear of fog. This was good enough for the pilots, and Team A, a Halifax towing Strathdy and Doig's glider with Lieutenant Allen and 14 men on board, took off at 5:55 p.m, slightly delayed because of problems with the intercom between the aircraft and glider. Team B, another Halifax towing the glider piloted by Davis and Fraser, and with Lieutenant Methven and 13 men on board, followed 30 minutes later. Despite altering course several times to avoid the cloud layer, which extended to over 5,000 feet, Team A had an uneventful flight across the North Sea until the Rebecca generator failed. Fortunately, the sky cleared as they crossed the southern coast of Norway, enabling them to fix their position and set a course northwest towards the target. But, despite bright moonlight, no fog in the valleys, and only 1 to 2 tenths cloud, it was impossible to map read or identify features by sight. A second approach was made, again without success. Without the Rebecca transceiver, it was impossible to pinpoint the correct landing zone. By this time, noted an RAF officer who was in the Halifax, the cloud had increased to about 3 tenths. The target could not be found, and as it was then extremely doubtful if there was sufficient petrol to tow back to Scotland, course was set for Peterhead. Flying at 9,000 feet, they hit more cloud and struggled to climb above it with the weight of the glider. In doing so, they collected some ice, which made it impossible to maintain height or even speed. They were forced to descend to 7,000 feet with lights ablaze. Not long after, at around 11:10 p.m, the tow rope broke, and the Halifax parted company with the glider. Cast adrift, Strathdy and Doig struggled to control their glider, and it eventually crash-landed in mountainous terrain near Stavanger in southwest Norway. Both pilots and 6 sappers, including driver Ernest Pendlebury, were killed in the crash, and 4 more were severely injured. The casualties were helped by Lieutenant Allen and the other 4 survivors to a nearby farm, which they reached at 1 a.m. At the farm, noted a report by an SOE agent who met some of them in captivity. They called in a Norwegian doctor who immediately telephoned for another doctor, but also told them that the Gestapo were coming. The Gestapo duly arrived and took the men away. The fate of the captives was sealed by the infamous Führerbefehl, or commando order, issued by Adolf Hitler in October 1942. It gave Hitler's security agencies the green light to murder any Allied soldiers who had been captured on missions behind enemy lines. The freshman captives from Team A were the first victims of this appalling breach of the Geneva Conventions. The badly wounded men were poisoned by an SS doctor, the rest taken into a nearby wood and shot. Team B, meanwhile, had also met with disaster. Both Halifax and glider crashed in a snowstorm in the mountains near Helleland, southern Norway, having crossed the coast at nearby Egersund. All 7 occupants of the Halifax were killed, as were 3 of the 16 men on the glider. The survivors were captured after the Germans were tipped off by locals. First they were taken to a camp at Slettebu near Egersund, where they were interrogated by several German SS security officers who had arrived by car from Oslo. Then, after just 2 hours of this, they were taken out one by one and executed. One man, who had broken his leg, was shot seated on a chair. Among the victims was 18-year-old sapper Gerald Williams. Operation Freshman was a costly failure. None of the key objectives, the destruction of the Vermork hydroelectric plant and its stocks of heavy water, had been achieved, and all 31 men on the gliders and the 6 crew and 1 passenger of the downed Halifax bomber had lost their lives. But as the RAF report noted, there were some silver linings. A great deal of most valuable technical and tactical information has been obtained as a result of the training and operational experience. The greatest praise was reserved for the glider pilots. Their courage, skill and enthusiasm, noted the report, were beyond praise and should serve as a shining example to all who may follow them. The first British glider pilots to take part in an operation against the enemy. Thank you.